Dr. Cornel West is running for president. We're going to talk to him in a second. But first, I want to see how he rolls. Watch this.
Years have been terrorized, traumatized, and hated, and we dish out love warriors and freedom fighters every generation, which means that we stand in solidarity with anybody who's occupied, anybody who's subjugated, anybody who's exploited, and that's why we focus on Gaza at this moment, because a genocidal attack is taking place.
Dr. Cornel West, of course, former professor of the practice of public philosophy at Harvard University, professor emeritus at Princeton University, one of the great orators of my lifetime, now running for president. So, Dr. West, you're talking about Gaza there, but what's interesting is that at this point, the three leading candidates, Biden, Trump, and RFK Jr., are taking a very unpopular position on Gaza. And it is a curious thing for people running for president to take such an unpopular position. Why do you think they're doing that?
You're talking about Biden, Trump, and Kennedy Jr.
That's right.
Those three, yeah, they're supporting the genocide. They're denying the genocide. They're enabling the genocide. They're supporting the genocide. I think one of the reasons why they're able to do that is because so many of our fellow citizens, my dear brother, you laid this out so beautifully in your critique of corporate America, corporate media, that they're not getting the truth about what's going on. There's a whitewashing, there's a sanitizing, there's a sterilizing that's taking place that hides and conceals the suffering of precious Palestinians. And so the thickness of the lies, and you know from Fox News and other places, if you tell a lie over and over and over and over and over and over again, people began to think that maybe even just a half truth is the only alternative. And so the CNN or MSNBC might mention something every once in a long while. I mean, take, for example, the 274 precious folk who were killed in this recent vicious attack on the refugee camp, right? Now, those were Palestinian lives, Israeli and American. 64 precious Palestinian babies, 57 precious Palestinian women. Most of the others are innocent. And what did the Americans do? They watched. What did the Americans do? Allow the terroristic IDF to use US equipment. What did the Americans do? Watched it from the drones, watched it from the piers. What was the response of the US government? To praise the operation and not say a mumbling word about the dead. The Palestinian dead, vast majority, or the American life taken, or the Israeli life taken. So that what you actually get is a full revelation of the unbelievable of racism in a certain sense, because what we're really talking about is they're saying to the world, precious Palestinians don't mean anything to us. That's what Biden is saying. That's what Harris is saying. That's what Austin is saying. That's what Blinken is saying. We can go right down on that's what Sullivan is saying. And that's why I call them war criminals, my brother.
Yeah.
There's got to be some moral compass in the public dialogue when you reach the point where you just normalize genocide. You normalize genocide denying, you normalize genocide enabling as if that's somehow business as usual. Not as long as I'm alive, not as long as the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer, and John Coltrane are alive. No. And you, of course, laid that case out against Brother Piers Morgan. He's yet to bounce back since you suffocated him with the truth because he couldn't take it. He had no response.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your moral courage in taking this on, because it's obviously not easy. Most corporate media will either yell at you or ignore you for doing that. I want to talk about how hard the race has been in a second, but let's stay on this topic, because whether it's Gaza or the control of corporate media, the overall corporate rule that we're in, the donors, how they control politicians, etc. In your lifetime, did you think that things were going to get better than this? And have things gotten a little bit better while still not being fixed on some fronts? Certainly, obviously, or have things gone backwards in some ways?
Well, I mean, the thing is, I've always believed that we are very much a wretched species, though, brother. Most of the history of our species, the history of organized greed and weaponized hatred and institutionalized indifference toward the vulnerable. What's wonderful about our species are those who muster the courage to have a resilience and a resistance against the greed and the hatred and the indifference. And so I'm never surprised by evil, no matter how thick it is. I'm never paralyzed by despair, that I have a view of the world. You can imagine, comes out of biblical texts. You can see it in Shakespeare, you see it in Chekhov, you can see it in the blues, you see it in Toni Morrison, you can see it in Coltrane, where you recognize that we are who we are as human beings, and we're wretched. We're too scared, we're too intimidated, we're too fearful, we're too cowardly, we're too conformist, and we're also beautifully courageous, beautifully loving. I got a mom and daddy that testify to that. Beautifully communal. We've had acts of solidarity that put smiles on our faces in the face of domination, in the face of occupation, in the face of organized greed and hatred. So you never lose sight of those two poles of who we are, so that on the one hand, my brother, fascism is on the march, not just across the nation, but around the world. There's no doubt about that. Did I think that fascism would escalate? Well, I remember reading Herbert Marcuse saying American fascism would in fact take place, and it would more likely take place by means of an electorate that was characterized by unruly passion and massive ignorance and fear, frustration, owing to the fact they're being exploited and there's no alternative to the weak liberalism. That's Herbert Marcuse, the thesis advisor of the great Angela Davis way back in the 1960s. I remember reading that. Yeah. And in some ways, he's very prophetic.
Yeah, so one more thing about this, because as I just happened to be watching a movie about the life of Bayard Rustin, and and he was viciously attacked and lost some teeth, and when he had the temerity to sit in the front of a bus earlier in his life, and he's one of the great civil rights leaders of our in this country, and help organize some of the great marches and protests. And so, and I remember, of course, the posters that those folks were holding up. I am a man, right? And as you see people saying that the 1,200 Israeli brothers and sisters that were lost on October 7th, monumental, worst attack against Jews since the Holocaust, awful, agreed. But the 37,000 dead Palestinians, 30 times as much, not important, and that Israel should keep going and that we should finance it. I just keep thinking of those posters, I am a man. And what's your sense of whether African Americans in this country and minorities overall have that kind of almost a spiritual connection with the Palestinian people, given what they have both suffered?
Well, I mean, it cuts very deep, though, brother. When you were enslaved for 244 years, and the average slave dies at the age of 27 in a land that views itself as an exemplar of liberty and equality and democracy, you say, hey, America, you got to get off that crack pipe. The level of hypocrisy, the level of mendacity, the level of self-delusion is overwhelming. And I should note this, don't you, brother, we just lost the great James Morris Lawson Jr., who was a very close friend of Martin Luther King Jr., invited Martin to Memphis in '68, and was the teacher of John Lewis and Diane Nash and James Bevel and so many others, that he, along with Bayard Rustin, began as pacifists. Now, Lawson remained a pacifist. As you know, Bayard Rustin was one of the great freedom fighters of the middle part of the 20th century. By the time the 60s came along, he's supporting US imperialism in Vietnam. You see that he begins to adjust to the lack of to unjust status quo in order to deal with politics. Now, you and I know politics is basically legalized bribery and normalized corruption. So you have to be in politics, but not of politics. But he, at the very end of his life, began to slowly accommodate himself and ends up pro-imperialist. And so most of his life was what? Anti-imperialist and pacifist. James Lawson, 95 years old, just died in Los Angeles 2 days ago. He was faithful unto death, morally consistent. And it's up to you and I and all of us who are concerned about this, from Anahita to Sister Marissa. We all have to be morally consistent. Each life has the same value. It has a dignity. It has a sanctity, no matter what color, religion, across the board. But it also means we have a critique of institutions and structures. And when we live in a world where people act as if a Palestinian life doesn't mean anything, then we say that to Biden, or we say that to our fellow citizens, we say that to Trump, we say that to our fellow human beings. We will in no way accommodate ourselves to that kind of barbarity and bestiality that unleashes the logic of extermination, because that's what we're actually seeing right now in Gaza. Once you dehumanize, once you have massive massacres, you are unleashing the logic of extermination, so that the crime of genocide more and more becomes the reality of genocide. And I've heard many, many folks say never again. And thank God we got a lot of young Jewish brothers and sisters who, in the name of being Jewish, in the name of being Judaic and followers of Judaism, are saying never again. And as you know, they're in solidarity with us in our solidarity with the precious Palestinian brothers and sisters in Gaza, West Bank, and other parts around.
Yeah, Jewish people in this country have oftentimes, almost all times, helped in the civil rights movement and been at the forefront of trying to save lives, save rights, etc. And so young Jewish Americans are doing it again, even in the case of Israel, and we deeply appreciate that. While others, unfortunately, including some of your opponents, are dehumanizing the Palestinians. RFK Jr. just saying that bombing the Palestinians is like denazifying them, which is just an awful thing to say.
It's just beyond pathetic that we would have Biden and Trump and RFK Jr. acting and saying those kind of things about a precious slice of humanity and still be viewed as serious candidates. That says something about the sickness in the country.
So, Dr. West, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Now, let's talk about your campaign, because I want to talk about how the media is reacting to you in a minute. But first, let's just do the timeline here. So you announced as running in the People's Party on June 5th of 2023, then the Green Party June 14th, then Independent on October 5th, and now you've got your own Justice for All party that you came out with January 31st, 2024. So help me understand that. What happened there? Why bouncing around those different parties?
Well, I was approached by the People's Party. I had a wonderful meeting with Brother Chris Hedges about this. And when I responded yes, then I began, and it was very clear it was not workable or feasible. I was then asked by Chris Hedges and Jill Stein and Ajamu Baraka to work with the Green Party. I was so glad to make that particular move. As you know, they had at that time access about 16, 17 states automatically. And I started working with them, and I got a good look from the inside. I said, no, this is not going to work as well. I've got to be free enough to speak what's on my heart, mind, and soul. I want to make sure that I can unleash whatever passion, whatever heart I have to tell the truth about suffering, not just in America, but around the world, poor and working people. As you know, that's why we have a project of abolition of poverty, abolition of homelessness, making sure that there's a living wage, $27 minimum and even higher in other places, and dismantling the American empire and the 800 military units around the world being cut drastically, 130 special operations around the world being cut across the board. It is a Martin Luther King-like vision. It's a Fannie Lou Hamer-like vision. And one of the challenges we have, I want to say, my dear brother, is that there will never, ever be fundamental social change in the United States without hitting the vicious legacy of white supremacy and its connection to predatory capitalist processes and male supremacy head on. And there is not a political party in America today that puts the struggle against the vicious legacy of white supremacy at its center and then makes the connection with the vicious effects of predatory capitalist processes, which is a short-term profit. We see it in the fossil fuel company, we see it in coal, we see it in oil, and we see it in gas. We can see it across the board. The capitalist system is a global system, and then also male supremacy. Those three sit at the very center of my campaign, and I had to be free enough as the jazz man that I aspire to be, to speak the depths of what's inside of me and what has been poured inside of me. And I could not do that within any of the parties that I was a part of.
So, Dr. West, politics is a rough and oftentimes an ugly business. I've suffered that, you've suffered that, so many good people that we know have suffered that. And you're a person who is admirably idealistic, and you just talked about staying true throughout your whole life, and that's a admirable goal to have. So that's a tough combination. So why get into politics, given that you're perfectly aware of how tough and ugly it is?
Well, brother, I would ask you the same question. Your calling is that of a journalist, a truth teller, and a justice seeker. And you want to be able to change the world. And if that calling is one in which embraces going into politics, then you make the move. And you made the move in your own courageous way. And my calling has always been one of running for justice. My major qualification for running for president is that I've been running for justice for over 51 years. And for me, that's crucial. That's fundamental. And I'm thoroughly convinced that there had to be a voice. And I come from a people whose anthem is lift every voice, not lift every echo. I'm not an echo of a silo. A voice is something like a Billie Holiday or like an Aretha Franklin or Curtis Mayfield. It's your distinctive voice tied to your distinctive call in solidarity with those Frantz Fanon called the wretched of the earth. And I'm thoroughly convinced that to lift my voice in this particular historical moment of overwhelming spiritual decay, overwhelming moral decadence, organized greed on steroids at the top, with corporate America basically running things, the frustration of the citizenry, the corruption of the political elites, and so many professional elites. We've got to raise one's voice. And for me to be able to raise that voice in a presidential run is one that can have most impact in terms of trying to keep alive the flickering candle of truth and justice and love in a moment of such overwhelming barbarity and bestiality, not just in Gaza, not just in Sudan, not just in Congo, not just in India with the neo-fascists escalating, not just in Hungary, but the South Side of Chicago, South Central, East LA, indigenous brothers and sisters in this country and around the world. It's a global moment of more and more dimness and grimness. And yet we've got to hold on to a hope, my brother.
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, I ran as you did. I'm an idealist as you are. And
that 2%'s a lot of people, man. I mean, these other people spending millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars, and you step in basically, I mean, just on your own and end up with hundreds of thousands of folk behind. Well, I'm just throwing that out just to let you know that that's significant though, brother.
Well, I appreciate you, and I got to the equivalent of about 1.6 million Democrats supporting me in a Democratic primary, and that's amazing. You're at least double that, et cetera, and your voice matters. But that leads to, of course, the question about media. So if your voice had the equality, equal time that Biden and Trump have, then I think that even if you didn't win, you could change the country. You could change it by reaching them with a clarion call for morality. But it appears to me that the biggest challenge you have is exactly that, reaching them, that amplifier that you need. So tell me about how the media has reacted to your campaign and what kind of a difference that's made.
Well, it's just so hard to get through all of the lies that you get in corporate media. Now, corporate media has been kind to me as an individual because I've had a long history of being able to gain access to it. But in terms of any kind of sustained focus, you remember they gave Trump $1 billion of free advertisement when he first ran. And what did the CEOs say? They said, he's bad for the country, he's good for us. What does good for us mean? Short-term profit. They were willing to sell the country down the river for short-term profit. Why? He's entertaining. You remember we were with Brother Bernie. Brother Bernie makes an announcement, and they send one reporter. If Bernie had received the kind of attention that Trump did, he would have been able to do even better. And I always love my brother Bernie, even given my disagreements with him at the present moment. So that on the one hand, I've been blessed to have assets as an individual, there's no doubt. But in terms of any sustained treatment, very, very little at all. Why? Because I know, my brother, that if people heed what I'm talking about, it is a substantive and serious threat to the plutocratic, oligarchic, capitalist regime with its imperial tentacles around the world, and too much white supremacy and male supremacy still operating. And of course, I would add homophobia and transphobia too. But the important thing for me is to keep a moral compass. And I say that as a cracked vessel. Every human being's a cracked vessel. Every human being falls short. We try again, fell again, and fell better. But that doesn't mean we don't know what the standards are, you see.
Yeah. So, Dr. West, I came up with an idea recently, and I want to bounce it off of you, to connect these two topics we're talking about. Because when you mentioned Bernie Sanders, it reminded me of it. Wouldn't Bernie Sanders have more leverage to try to get the carnage in Gaza stopped, which he cares about and wants to have it stopped, if he withdrew his endorsement from Biden and said, I'm happy to give it back to him the minute he can get Israel to stop the bombing of Gaza? By not doing that, isn't he giving away leverage that could really help people?
A wonderful point, though, brother. I haven't heard anybody make that point. No, I think that Brother Bernie's challenge is very much like you're in a jazz band and you got the right moment to play your solo so it has the most impact on a hungry audience whose souls you want to touch. And you're not there to play that solo because his timing was off. If he had come out with a ceasefire immediately, it would have been different. People would have seen the courage and the integrity. But when you're on a Democratic Party plantation, none of them can say ceasefire until the boss says ceasefire. When the boss says ceasefire, then all the rest of them say ceasefire. And it's clear it's not a matter of moral integrity. It's just a matter of team spirit. So there's no spiritual and ethical content there. We know Bernie has strong ethical content, but his timing was off. So that recently, he's been very strong on this issue. But if he had come out early and then, as you say, said to the Democratic Party, I cannot accept someone who is enabling massacres. Then if it continue on, I cannot accept someone who is enabling genocide. He would have had a similar kind of moral integrity that he had when you and I were supporting him in regard to his critique of Wall Street greed. But he lost that moment because his timing was off. And it's in life oftentimes is, in part, a matter of timing, Does that make sense? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm happy he came to the side that he did, and his voice matters a lot. But I often talk about leverage. Biden doesn't use his leverage with Netanyahu, so then I don't believe that he actually cares about Palestinians. He claims to, that he does, and he says words, but words don't matter when you send a $20 billion check over to Israel and then refuse to use your leverage. So when I see Bernie, AOC, and other good people refusing to use their leverage against Biden, I also wonder if it's just a miscalculation of politics or if it's just too uncomfortable.
But I think Bernie is different than AOC in this sense, though. I was listening to AOC give a talk to Jewish brothers and sisters the other day, and it was clear that she was speaking as a politician as opposed to a truth teller. Bernie will sit there and talk to Jewish brothers and sisters and tell them the truth from the depths of his heart. He doesn't speak as a politician in that regard. So that there's a sense in which Bernie's moment where he could have come forward stronger became a moment in which he became a politician. He wanted to be on Biden's team. It was premature. It was without leverage, as you said. It was too early. And there were already crucial issues that he could have used to put more power and pressure to bear on Biden, and he didn't do it. But like you say, I'm certainly glad that he's been able to come much further from that than before. But it is what it is. I mean, everybody's who they are, not somebody else.
Yeah, that's definitely right. Okay, so now final thing is really important. So, Dr. West, as I look at your policy planks, whether it's Gaza or Medicare for all, reducing the Pentagon's budget significantly, redirecting that towards the American people rather than towards war and corruption, defense contractors. It's very hard for us to not agree, right? So I agree with your policies. I think our audience is very, very frustrated at Joe Biden, and they're looking for an alternative. I think that they probably agree with a lot of your policies. I know everybody asks you about how are you going to get elected, but we get it. We get the landscape. It's very difficult for a third-party candidate, but you're doing the best you can. And what more can we ask of you than to run with all of your energy and passion and heart? But what I'm curious about is, if you win, have you thought through how do we effectuate this change? Who would be in the cabinet? Because presumably you wouldn't pick the establishment guys. Obama won, and then he picked all Clinton appointees, and then what was the point, right? So who do you bring in? What do you do as president to make the difference?
But I'll say this though, brother. I do think that you and I would wrestle with this issue of whether the Democratic Party is beyond redemption or not. I wrestle with this with my dear sister Nina Turner, who I have such great love and respect for, and I know a number of people that see I've reached the point where the Democratic Party is beyond redemption. And once you make that move, then you're no longer in the corporate duopoly, and you're looking for a substantive alternative. And the only way you get a substantive alternative is to try to move out and create one, and then try to enact and embody one as you create it. And if, for example, and I think there's a good chance that Biden will pull out. I think he's going to have an LBJ moment. I think the internal conflict within his party, I think the burden of his family situation is going to be such that there's a good chance he'll pull out. And I think Trump could still end up in jail, actually, given him running his mouth and the impulsive behavior and so forth with the courts and the judges. And in that situation, both the B teams of both parties would have to step forward. And I'm still going. I'm still standing, trying to be consistent, trying to be constant, trying to hold on to whatever integrity, honesty, and decency and courage and solidarity with poor and working people around the world, and deeply concerned about issues of white supremacy and male supremacy and capitalist exploitation of workers. So that, as you know, we're in real time. We don't really know what's going to happen. And if I do win, I want to head the empire, to dismantle the empire. I want a fundamental transformation of American society that puts poor and working people at the very center. Those Sly Stone called everyday people would be in the driver's seat, as opposed to the corporate elite, as opposed to the plutocrats and the oligarchs who are running things. The politicians, in so many ways, just window dressing. And so that truth, that justice, and in the end, you're trying to create a culture that gets beyond just hatred and revenge. I'm still very much tied to a long legacy of love warriors and joy spreaders. And I want to talk as much about love in public life, because I think compassion is something that is worthy of our attention in a moment when you're getting escalating hatred and revenge as the norm, not just in politics, but in culture as a whole.
Yep. All right, well, it is an interesting run. Obviously, everybody check out CornelWest2024.com. We'll have the link down below in the description box. Dr. West, just an amazing person in every regard, and now trying to make an enormous impact in the American political landscape. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
I salute you, my brother. You stay strong now, man.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.